continuing into hour 5. Thank you for hanging with us if you're listening to everything. On page 263, we left off where it says question at the top of the first column. Question: do sutras such as the Flower Garland, the sutras of the correct and equal period, wisdom, profound secrets, Lankavatara, Mahavrachana, and Nirvana belong to the 9 easy acts group or the 6 difficult acts group? Answer: to Shun, Chi Yin, Fa Tsang, and Chen Quan of the Flower Garland School, who are all masters of the 3 divisions of the canon, state that both the Flower Garland Sutra and the Lotus Sutra belong to the 6 difficult acts category. Though in name they are 2 different sutras, they are identical to their teaching. They are identical in their teachings and principles. It is similar to the statement, though the 4 perceptions of reality are separate, the truth they point to is identical. Thank you. Excuse me. The Tripitaka master, Xuanzang, and the great teacher Tzuin of the Dharma Characteristics School state that the Profound Secret Sutra and the Lotus Sutra both expound the consciousness-only doctrine. They date from the 3rd period of the Buddha's teachings and belong to the 6 difficult acts category. Jitsang of the 3 Treatises School asserts that the Wisdom Sutra and the Lotus Sutra are different names for a single entity, 2 sutras that preach one teaching. The Tripitaka master Shenwu Wei, Shinkan Chi, and Pukung of the True Word School say that the Mahavrachana Sutra and the Lotus Sutra are identical in principle and that both belong to the 6 difficult category. But the Japanese True Word leader Kobo says that the Mahavrachana Sutra belongs neither to the 6 difficult nor to the 9 easy category. The Mahavrachana Sutra, according to him, stands apart from all the sutras preached by Shakyamuni Buddha, since it was preached by the thus come one Mahavrachana, a Buddha of the Dharma body. Likewise, some persons assert that, since the Flower Garland Sutra was preached by the thus come one of the reward body, it stands outside the categories of 6 difficult and 9 easy. Such, then, are the views put forth by the founders of these 4 schools. The thousands of students of these schools likewise subscribe to the same views. I must observe sadly that, although it would be simple enough to point out the error of the views propounded by these men, if I did so, the people of today would not even look in my direction. They would go on there with their erroneous ways and in the end would slander me to the ruler of the country and put my life in jeopardy. Nevertheless, our merciful father Shakyamuni Buddha, when he faced his end in the grove of Saltri, stated as his dying instructions that we are to rely on the law and not upon persons. Now, I'm going to just inject something here. This particular sentence from the sutra is qualified quite often that you should not listen to Daisaku Ikeda, you should just read the Gosho. Okay? And that's totally screwed up bullshit. Okay? Because this is where it's coming from and this is what it's about. It's about incorrect teachers of incorrect teachings, not correct teachers of the correct teaching. I mean, that's what's so stupid about even putting it in that kind of a... You're assuming that you're smarter than everybody when you do that. Everybody that's ever existed when you do that. That is a great, great slander. So let me clarify. Rely on the law and not upon persons is talking about all the incorrect teachers and all the incorrect understandings of correct teachings that occurred prior to the Lotus Sutra. That's what it's talking about. That's the law, okay? And the teachers are those incorrect teachers, not Nichiren, not Daisaku Ikeda, not Josei Toda, no one that's associated with the lineage that I'm talking to you about for these many years now. All right, so he says we rely on the law, not upon persons, not relying upon persons. On the second to the last paragraph on second column, 263. Not relying upon persons means that when persons of the first and second, third, and fourth ranks preach, even though they are bodhisattvas such as Universal, Worthy, and Manjushri, who have attained the stage of near perfect enlightenment, if they do not preach with the sutra in hand, then they are not to be accepted. In other words, if they do not preach with the sutra in hand, so in other words, if they're not preaching what has been taught to them, then they're not to be accepted because they're not capable yet. It is also laid down that one should rely on sutras that are complete and final and not on those that are not complete and final. We must therefore look carefully among the sutras to determine which are complete and final and which are not, and put our faith in the former. Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, in his commentary on the 10 stages, Commentary on the 10 stages sutra states, do not rely on treatises that distort the sutras, rely on those that are faithful to the sutras. The great teacher Tentai says, that which accords with the sutras is not to be written down and made available, but put no faith in anything that in word or meaning fails to do so. The great teacher Dingyo says, depend upon the preachings of the Buddha and do not put faith in traditions handed down orally. Enshin, also known as the great teacher Chisho, and by the way, that's not saying don't disregard the orally transmitted teachings from Nichiren. I mean, this is where you have to understand what the hell you're reading. Okay? The great teacher Dingyo, as we struggle with the curtains, I'm sure that they're just about done. I will continue reading as soon as they are. It's very distracting. I can't continue. The great teacher Tentai says, top of page 264, I'm going to start over. Do not rely on treatises that distort the sutras. Rely on those that are faithful to the sutras. The great teacher Tentai says, that which accords with the sutras is to be written down and made available. But put no faith in anything that in word or meaning fails to do so. The great teacher Dingyo says, depend upon the preaching of the Buddha and do not put faith in traditions handed down orally. Enshin, also known as the great teacher Chisho, says, in transmitting the teachings, rely on the written words of the scriptures. To be sure, the leaders of the various schools whose opinions I have quoted above all appear to base themselves on some groups of sutras and treatises in attempting to establish which teachings are the most superior. But these men all cling firmly to the doctrines of their own school and perpetuate the erroneous views handed down from their predecessors, so that their judgments are characterized by twisted interpretations and personal feelings. Their doctrines are no more than private opinions that have been dressed up and glorified. The non-Buddhist schools of such men as Vatsu and Vaipula, which appeared in India after the Buddha's passing, are even more wrong in their views and more cunning in their doctrines than their counterparts before the Buddha, because they borrowed ideas from Buddhism. Similarly, since the introduction of Buddhism to China in the latter Han Dynasty, non-Buddhist views and writings have become even more wrong and cunning than the pre-Buddhist writings of Confucianism that deal with the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors of antiquity. Also, the teachings of the flower garland, Dharma characteristics, true word, and other schools, jealous of the correct doctrines of the Tendai school, brazenly interpret the words of the true sutra in such a way that they will accord with the provisional teachings. Page 264, top of the second column. Those who seek the way, however, should reject such one-sided views, transcending disputes between one's own school and others, and should not treat others with contempt. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha says, among the sutras, I have preached, now preach, and will preach. This Lotus Sutra is the most difficult to believe and the most difficult to understand. Myolo remarks, though other sutras may call themselves the king among sutras, there are none that announces itself as foremost among all the sutras preached in the past, now being preached or being preached in the future. He also says concerning the Buddha's statement that this wonderful sutra surpasses all those of the past, present, and future, there are those who persist in going astray. Thus they commit the grave fault of slandering the sutra, and for many long kalpas are subjected to sufferings. Startled by these passages in the sutra and its commentaries, I examined the entire body of sutras and the expositions and commentaries of the various teachers and found that my doubts and suspicions melted away. But now, those foolish true word priests rely upon their mudras and mantras and believe that the true word school is superior to the Lotus Sutra simply because the great teacher Jikaku and other teachers have assured them that the true word is superior. Their views are not worthy of discussion. Let me read that again, because he's just now qualifying to you why he's able to say what he's saying right now. because he read all this, and again, he said, well, how does this make sense? And so he had to go back and reread all the other sutras and all the other commentaries. He became an absolute scholar of all of the Buddhist teachings of the lifetime of Shakyamuni. He says, let me read this again, middle of page 264. This is very key. Nichiren actually literally had studied everything else. That's what you got to understand. There's no greater mentor that you could have than somebody that is fully aware of everything. Startled by these passages in the sutras and its commentary, I examined the entire body of the sutras and the expositions and commentaries of the various teachers and found that my doubts and suspicions melted away. Once I read what the sutras actually read instead of reading all these opinions from old dudes. But now those foolish true word priests rely upon their mudras and mantras and believe that the true word school is superior to the Lotus Sutra, simply because the great teacher Jikaku and other teachers have assured them that the true word is superior. Their views are not worthy of discussion. The Secret Solemnity Sutra says the 10 stages, flower garland, Kimnara, great king, great tree, supernatural powers, Shrimela, and the other sutras all derive from this sutra. This Secret Solemnity Sutra is the greatest of all sutras. So there's one sutra saying it's the greatest of all sutras. He gives you another example. The Great Cloud Sutra at the bottom of page 264, second column. This sutra is the world-turning king among all sutras. Why is this? Because in this sutra is set forth the doctrine of the constancy of the Buddha nature as the true nature of all beings. Top of page 265, first full paragraph. The Sixth Paramita Sutra says, all the correct teachings expounded by the countless Buddhas of the past and the 84,000 wonderful teachings that I have now expounded may as a whole be divided into 5 categories. First, sutras, the Buddha's teachings. Second, Vinaya, monastic rules. Third, Abhidharma, treatises. Fourth, Prajna Paramita, the teachings for the perfection of wisdom. And fifth, Dharani, mystic formulas. The works in these 5 collections will instruct sentient beings. Among sentient beings, there may be those who cannot accept and abide by the sutras, Vinaya, Abhidharma, Prajna, Paramita, or there may be sentient beings who commit various evil acts, such as the 4 major offenses, the 8 major offenses, or the 5 cardinal sins that lead to the hell of incessant suffering, or slander the correct and equal sutras, or are ekchantikas and disbelieve Buddhism itself. In order to wipe out such crimes, give quick release to the offenders and allow them to enter into nirvana at once. I preach for their sake this collection of Dharanis. That's from the Sixth Paramita Sutra. These 5 divisions of the Dharma are compared to the 5 flavors of milk: cream, curdled milk, butter, and ghee, respectively, with ghee as the finest. The division containing the Dharanis compares to ghee. Ghee has the finest and most subtle flavor among the 5 substances enumerated above and is capable of curing various sicknesses and easing the minds and bodies of sentient beings. Similarly, the Dharani division stands foremost among the 5 divisions of the teachings because it can do away with grave offenses. Okay, that was the Sixth Paramita Sutra, saying it's the best because it's got all these magic formulas in it. The Profound Secret Sutra states, at that time, Bodhisattva Superlative Truth appeared addressing the Buddha, saying, world-honored one, in the first period of your teaching, when you were the forest sage, when you were in the forest sage aesthetics gathering or deer park in Varanasi, or for the sake of those who wished merely to seek the vehicle of the voice hearers, you expounded the doctrine of the 4 Noble Truths, in this way turning the wheel of the correct law. This was a very wonderful thing, a very rare thing. No heavenly or human being in any of the countless worlds had ever been able to expound such a doctrine as this before. And yet, the wheel of the law that you turned at that time left room for improvement. Left room for doubt. It was not yet final in meaning and offered ample opportunities for dispute. Then, world-honored one, In the second period of your teachings, for the sake of those who wished merely to seek the great vehicle, you taught that all phenomena are without distinctive natures of their own, that there is no birth or death, that all things are basically in a state of quietude, and that the nature of things as they exist constitutes nirvana. You turned the wheel of the correct law, although you did not reveal the whole truth. This was even more wonderful and even rarer thing, but the wheel of the law that you turned at that time left room for improvement, left room for doubt. It was not yet final in meeting and offered ample opportunity for dispute. Now, world-honored one, in the third period of your teaching, for the sake of those who wish to practice the vehicle that saves all beings, you taught that all phenomena are without distinctive natures, that there is no birth or death, that all things are basically in a state of quietude, and that the nature of things as they exist constitutes nirvana, and then you have taught that the nature you spoke of itself lacks anything that can be called a nature. You have turned the wheel of the law, of the correct law, and expounded these doctrines in their perfect form. This is the most wonderful and rarest thing of all. This wheel of law that you have turned leaves no room for improvement, no room for doubt. It is truly complete and final in meaning and offers no opportunity for dispute. Okay, that was from the Profound Secrets Sutra. Okay, now he goes to the Great Wisdom Sutra. So each one is proclaimed, this one's perfect. Finally, now you nailed it. Each time, oh, now you nailed it. Oh, now you nailed it. Oh, now you nailed it. That's why I had to get to the end of his life with the Lotus Sutra to reveal the truth. He had already been doing everything in expedient means for as long as he could. He says, okay, so the Great Wisdom Sutra on page 266 says, when one regards whatever teachings one hears, either secular or Buddhist, as an expedient means, one is brought to understand that these can be incorporated into the profound principles that Prajna or Buddha wisdom alone can grasp. When, with the same wisdom, one understands that all secular matters and actions represent the essential nature of things, one will see not a thing that is outside that essential nature. Okay, so that's the Great Wisdom Sutra, saying everything is contained in this teaching. The first volume of the Mahavajrana Sutra states, Master of Secrets, Vajrasattva, there is a great vehicle practice that arouses the mind that is without attachment to things and leads one to understand that all phenomena are without individual natures. Why is this? Because in past times, those who practiced this way were able to observe the alaya consciousness within the five components, and to realize that individual natures are illusory. They're an illusion. The same sutra also says, Master of Secrets, these men in this way cast aside the concept of non-self and came to realize that the mind exists in a realm of complete freedom and that the individual mind has from the beginning never known birth or death. It also says emptiness is by nature removed from the sense organs and their objects. It has no form or boundaries. Beyond any futile theory, it is equal to space. It represents the ultimate in the absence of individual nature. It also says the Buddha Mahavajrana addressed the Master of Secrets, saying, Master of Secrets, what is the meaning of enlightenment? It means to understand one's own mind as it truly is. Okay, from the Flower Garland Sutra. The Flower Garland Sutra states, among the various beings of all the different worlds, there are a few who seek to practice the vehicle of the voice hearers. There are still fewer who seek that of the cause awakened ones, and those who seek the great vehicle are extremely rare. To seek the great vehicle is relatively easy to do, but to believe in the doctrines of this sutra is difficult in the extreme. And how much more difficult it is to uphold this sutra, keep its teachings correctly in mind, practice them as directed, and understand their true meaning. To take the major world system and hold it on the top of your head without moving for the space of a kalpa is not such a difficult thing to do, but to believe in the doctrines of this sutra is difficult in the extreme. This is again from the Flower Garland Sutra. To offer musical instruments for the space of a kalpa to all living beings who are as countless as the dust particles of the major world system will not gain one much merit, but to believe in the doctrines of this sutra will gain one merit in great quantity. To hold 10 Buddha lands in the palm of one's hand and remain stationary in the midst of the air for the space of a kalpa is not so difficult to do. But to believe in the doctrines of this sutra is difficult in the extreme. To offer musical instruments for the space of a kalpa to all the living beings who are as countless as the dust particles of the 10 Buddha lands will not gain one much merit. But to believe in the doctrines of this sutra will gain one merit in great quantity. For the space of a kalpa, one may honor and give alms to the various thus come ones who are countless as the dust particles of the 10 Buddha lands. But if one can accept and abide by the doctrines of this chapter, one will gain vastly greater merit. At the top of page 267, the Nirvana Sutra says, although the various correct and equal sutras of the great vehicle will bring inestimable merit, there is no way to describe how much greater is the merit gained through this sutra. It is 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times greater in a way that is beyond calculation or simile. Good man, milk comes from the cow. Cream is made from milk. Curdled milk is made from cream. Butter is made from curdled milk. And ghee is made from butter. Ghee is the finest of all. One who eats it will be cured from all illnesses, just as if all kinds of medicinal properties were contained in it. Good man, the Buddha is like this. The Buddha brought forth the 12 divisions of discourse. From among these 12 divisions, he brought forth the sutras. From among the sutras, he brought forth the correct and equal sutras. From the correct and equal sutras, he brought forth the doctrine of prajna paramita, the perfection of wisdom. And from prajna paramita, he brought forth the Nirvana Sutra. The Nirvana Sutra is comparable to ghee. Ghee here is a metaphor for the Buddha nature. Finally, the Daishonin says on page 267, last full paragraph, first column, when we compare these sutra passages that I have just quoted with those of the Lotus Sutra that describe it as the greatest among the sutras the Buddha has preached, now preaches, and will preach, the Buddha with the 6 difficult and 9 easy acts, the latter stand out like the bright moon beside the stars, or Mount Sumeru beside the other 8 mountain ranges that surround it. And yet, Chen Quan of the Flower Garland School, Tzu En of the Dharma Characteristic Schools, Chia Sang of the Three Treatises School, and Kobo of the True Word School, all men who were believed to possess the Buddha eye, did not understand the above passages of the Lotus Sutra. How then could the ordinary scholars of the time, who appear to be quite blind, be expected to judge the difference between the Lotus Sutra and the other sutras? This difference is as plain as black and white, or Mount Sumeru side by side with a mustard seed. Yet these men go astray. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that they are also confused by principles that are as elusive as air. Unless one can perceive the relative profundity of the various writings, one cannot judge the worth of the principles they reveal. The passages from the 8 sutras quoted above, these ones that I just said by name, quoted above, appear in separate volumes and are out of sequence in terms of their relative depth. Since this makes it difficult to discern the worth of the various teachings, I will explain these passages to help the ignorant understand. When it comes to kings, there are great kings and petty kings. And in any matter whatsoever, there are parts and there is the whole. We have talked about the simile of the 5 flavors of milk, but we must understand when this simile is being applied to Buddhist teachings as a whole and when it is being applied to one part of those teachings. The 6th Paramita Sutra teaches that sentient beings can attain enlightenment, but it refuses to apply this to those without the nature of enlightenment. And of course, it mentions nothing about the doctrines that Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment countless ages in the past. The 6th Paramita Sutra cannot, in fact, even compare with the Nirvana Sutra, which compares itself with ghee among the 5 flavors, much less with the theoretical and essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra. And yet the great teacher Kobo of Japan, misled by the above quoted passage of the 6th Paramita Sutra, assigned the Lotus Sutra to the 4th flavor, that of butter. If the so-called ghee of the Dharani's mystic formulas cannot even match the so-called gi of the Nirvana Sutra, then how can he possibly make such an obvious mistake? And yet he writes that the Buddhist teachers of China vied with one another to steal the gi, calling Tintai and others thieves. And in a boastful vein, he declares, what a pity it is that the worthies of ancient times were not able to taste this gi. Putting all this aside, I will point out the truth for the sake of my followers. Because others do not choose to believe it now, they are persons who thereby form a reverse relation. Now, what does he mean by that? He basically said, because others choose to not believe it now and therefore slander the correct teaching, they will thereby form a reverse relation. They will never get away from my disciples or me or the teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. They will all attain Buddhahood just because they ran into us and slandered us. That's how powerful our teaching is. Putting all this aside, I will point out the truth for the sake of my followers. Because others do not choose to believe it now, they are persons who thereby form a reverse relationship. They slander, they'll become, they're like the people that threw the sticks and staves at never disparaging. It took them a hell of a long time to attain Buddhahood. By tasting a single drop, one can tell the flavor of the great ocean. And by observing a single flower in bloom, one can predict the advent of spring. One does not have to cross the water to far off Sung, China, spend 3 years traveling to Eagle Peak in India, enter the palace of the Dragon King the way Nagarjuna did, visit Bodhisattva Maitreya in the Tushita heaven the way Bodhisattva Asanga did, or be present at the 2 places and the 3 assemblies when Shakyamuni preached the Lotus Sutra in order to judge the relative merits of the Buddha's lifetimes of teachings. It is said that snakes can tell 7 days in advance when a flood is going to occur. This is because they are akin to dragons who make the rain fall. Crows can tell what lucky or unlucky events are going to take place throughout the course of a year. This is because in a past existence they were diviners. Birds are better at flying than human beings. And I, Nichiren, am better at judging the relative merits of the sutras than Qin Quan of the Flower Garland School, Chia Suang of the 3 Treatises School, Suyin of the Dharma Characteristics School, and Kobo of the True Word School. That Dingyo could, if Chun King and the others had not accepted the teachings of Tiantai and Dingyo, how could they have expected to escape the sin of slandering the law? I, Nichiren, and don't forget, Dingyo qualified that they had not, because they had all come over to him because he defeated all of them in debate, and they all came to Mount Hei. Same thing had happened with Tiantai. He defeated them all in debate. They all came over to Tiantai. But in time, that was lost. That reality was lost. I, Nichiren, says at the top of page 268, second column, I, Nichiren, am the richest man in all of present-day Japan. I have dedicated my life to the Lotus Sutra, and my name will be handed down in ages to come. So it has. If one is Lord of the great ocean, then all the gods of the various rivers will obey one. And if one is king of Mount Sumeru, then the gods of the various other mountains cannot help but serve one. If a person fulfills the teachings of the 6 difficult and 9 easy acts of the Lotus Sutra, then even though he may not have read the entire body of sutras, he should follow him. All should follow him. In addition to the 3 pronouncements of the Buddha of the treasure tower of the Lotus Sutra, the Devadatta chapter contains 2 enlightening admonitions that he has said. There were actually 8. He had only mentioned 6 sutras. Now he's talking about those other 2 that he's talking about that were contained in Devadatta. Let me go. In addition to the 3 pronouncements of the Buddha in the Treasure Tower chapter of the Lotus Sutra, the Devadatta chapter contains 2 enlightening admonitions. The first reveals that Devadatta will attain Buddhahood. Devadatta was a man of incorrigible disbelief, the type called Ikchantika, and yet is predicted that he will in the future become a Buddha called the Thus Come One Heavenly King. The 40 volumes of the Nirvana Sutra state that all beings, including the Ikchantikas, possess the Buddha nature, but the actual proof of that is found in this chapter of the Lotus Sutra and nowhere else. There are countless other persons, such as the monk Sunakshatra, or King Ajatashatru, who have committed the 5 cardinal sins and slandered the law. But Devadatta is called as one example to represent all the countless others. He is the chief offender, and it is assumed that all lesser offenders will fare as he does. Thus it is revealed that all those who commit the 5 or 7 cardinal sins, or who slander the law, or who are ikchantikas, inherently opposed to taking faith, will become Buddhas like the thus come one heavenly king. That's where he's talking about they will thereby form a reverse relation. Poison turns into sweet dew. In other words, once you encounter the Lotus Sutra, even if you're a slanderer, you never quit encountering it until you perfect yourself to Buddha. Okay? Thus it is revealed that all those who commit the 5 or 7 cardinal sins, or who slander the law, or who are ikchantikas, inherently opposed to taking faith, will become Buddhas like the thus come one heavenly king, Devadatta. Poison turns into sweet dew, the finest of all flavors. Bottom of page 268. The second admonition concerns the fact that the Dragon King's daughter attained Buddhahood, at the top of page 269 now. When she attained Buddhahood, this does not mean simply that one person did so. It reveals the fact that all women will attain Buddhahood. In the various Hinayana sutras that were preached before the Lotus Sutra, it is denied that women can ever attain Buddhahood. In the Mahayana sutras, other than the Lotus Sutra, it would appear that women can attain Buddhahood or be reborn in the Pure Land, but they may do so only after they have changed into some other form. It is not the kind of immediate attainment of Buddhahood that is based on the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single mode of life, and as is described in the Devadatta chapter of the Lotus Sutra. Thus, it is an attainment of Buddhahood or rebirth in the Pure Land in name only, and not in reality. The only reality that's ever depicted is the Dragon King's daughter in the Lotus Sutra. The Dragon King's daughter represents the one example that stands for all the rest. When the Dragon King's daughter attained Buddhahood, it opened up the way for attaining Buddhahood for all women of latter ages. Confucianism preaches filial piety and care for one's parents, but it is limited to this present life. It provides no way for one to assist one's parents in their future lives. And the Confucian sages and worthies are therefore sages and worthies in name only and not in reality. Brahmanism, though it recognizes the existence of past and future lives, similarly offers no means to assist one's parents to a better life in the future. Buddhism alone can do so, and thus it is the true way of sages and worthies. But in the Hinayana and Mahayana sutras preached before the Lotus Sutra and in the schools based on these sutras, to gain the way even for oneself is impossible. One can hardly hope to do anything for one's parents either. Though the texts of these sutras may say that they can bring about enlightenment, in reality that is not the case. Only with the preaching of the Lotus Sutra, in which the Dragon King's daughter attained Buddhahood, did it become evident that the attainment of Buddhahood was a possibility for all mothers. And when it was revealed that even an evil man such as Devadatta could attain Buddhahood, it became evident that Buddhahood was a possibility for all fathers. The Lotus Sutra is the classic of filial piety. The Lotus Sutra is the classic filial piety of Buddhism. This ends my discussion of the 2 admonitions contained in the Devadatta chapter. Continuing on page 269 in the middle. Awed by the 5 proclamations of the Buddha made in the Treasure Tower and Devadatta chapters, and countless bodhisattvas promised the Buddha that they would propagate the Lotus Sutra as described in the Encouraging Devotion chapter. I will hold up this passage of the sutra like a bright mirror, so that all may see how the present-day priests of the Zen precepts and Nimbutsu schools and their lay supporters are guilty of slandering the law. I need to read this again because it's very important for you to understand this.
Okay.
Awed by the 5 proclamations of the Buddha, made in the Treasure Tower and Devadatta chapters, the countless Buddhas promised the Buddha that they would propagate the Lotus Sutra, as described in the Encouraging Devotion chapter, not the Peaceful Practices chapter, the Encouraging Devotion chapter. Get that, because that's the key. That's what says we're going to have to face all the things Nichiren did. That's what he's qualifying here. It's not peaceful practices. That might be your next lifetime. Your lifetime here is based on the encouraging devotion chapter. I will hold up this passage of the sutra like a bright mirror so that all may see how the present day priests of the Zen precepts and Nimbutsu schools and their lay supporters are guilty of slandering the law. On the 12th day of the 9th month of last year, between the hours of the rat and ox, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., this person named Nichiren was beheaded. It is his soul that has come to this island of Sato in the 2nd month of the following year, snowbound, that is writing this to send to his close disciples. The description of the evil age in the encouraging devotion chapter seems terrible, but one who cares nothing about oneself for the sake of the law has nothing to be frightened about. Others reading it will be terrified. This scriptural passage is the bright mirror that Shakyamuni, many treasures in the Buddhas of the 10 directions, left for the future of Japan, and in which the present state of the country is reflected. It may also be regarded as a keepsake from me. The encouraging devotion chapter states at the bottom of page 269, and this is where the 20-line verse comes from, guys. He's going to read it right here to you. The encouraging devotion chapter states, we beg you not to worry. After the Buddha, and you've all heard me read this to you. The encouraging devotion chapter states, we beg you not to worry. After the Buddha has passed into extinction in an age of fear and evil, we will preach far and wide. Page 269 at the very bottom second column. There will be, going on to page 270, many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us and will attack us with swords and staves, but we will endure all these things. In that evil age, there will be monks with perverse wisdom and hearts that are fawning and crooked, who will suppose they have attained what they have not attained, being proud and boastful in heart. Or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of parched rags and living in retirement, who will claim that they are practicing the true way, despising and looking down on all humankind. Greedy for profit and support, they will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. These men with evil in their hearts, constantly thinking of worldly affairs, will borrow the name of forest-dwelling monks and take delight in proclaiming our faults. Because in the midst of the great assembly they constantly try to defame us, they will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins and householders, as well as the other monks, slandering and speaking evil of us, saying, these are men of perverted views who preach non-Buddhist doctrines. In the muddy kalpa, in an evil age, there will be many things to fear. Evil demons will take possession of others, and through them curse, revile, and heap shame on us. The evil monks of that evil age, failing to understand the Buddha's expedient means, how he preaches the law in accordance with what is appropriate, will confront us with foul language and angry frowns again and again, and we will be banished. He paraphrased a little bit there. That's why I lost the continuity of the full 20 thing there. Okay, bottom page 270. The 8th volume of the annotations on the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra comments as follows. In this passage, 3 types of arrogance are cited. First, there is a section that exposes people's mistaken views. This represents the arrogance and presumption of lay people. Next, there is a section that exposes the arrogance and presumption of members of the Buddhist clergy. Third is a section that exposes the arrogance and presumption of those who pretend to be sages. Of these 3, the first can be endured. The second exceeds the first, and the third is the most formidable of all. This is because the second and third ones are increasingly harder to recognize for what they are. The Dharma teacher Chitu writes in Tongchon, first regarding the verse section that begins with, there will be many ignorant people. The first part tells how the votaries of the Lotus Sutra must endure evils inflicted by the body, mouth, and mind of their opponents. Okay, that includes us then, huh? All right. This refers to non-Buddhists and evil lay Buddhists. The next part that begins with, in that evil age, deals with arrogant members of the Buddhist clergy. The third part that begins, or there will be forest-dwelling monks, deals with the members of the clergy who pretend to be sages and use their position so that they can act as leaders of all the other evil people. And the same text goes on to say, the section that begins, because in the midst of the great assembly, describes how these men will appear to the government authority, slandering the law and its practitioners. In the 9th volume of the Nirvana Sutra, we read, good man, there are ikchantikas, or people or persons of incorrigible disbelief. They pretend to be arhats, living in deserted places and speaking slanderously of the correct and equal sutras of the great vehicle. When ordinary people see them, they all suppose that they are true arhats and speak of them as great bodhisattvas. It also says, at that time, this sutra will be widely propagated throughout Japadvipa. In that age, there will be evil monks who will steal this sutra and divide it into many parts, losing the color, scent, and flavor of the correct teaching that it contains. These evil men will read and recite this sutra, but they will ignore and put aside the profound and vital principles that the Thus Come One has expounded in it and replace them with ornate rhetoric and meaningless talk. They will tear off the first part of the sutra and stick it on the end, tear off the end and put it at the beginning, put the end at the and the beginning in the middle, and the middle at the beginning or the end. You must understand that these evil monks are companions of the devil. The 6th volume, Parinirvana Sutra states, there are also ikchantikas who resemble arhats but who commit evil deeds. These are also arhats who resemble ikchantikas. There are also arhats who resemble ikchantikas but display merciful hearts. The ikchantikas who look like arhats spend their time slandering the correct and equal sutras to the populace. The arhats who look like ikchantikas, on the other hand, are critical of the voice hearers and go about preaching the correct and equal sutras. They address the populace saying, you and I are all bodhisattvas. Why? Because each living being possesses the Buddha nature. But the populace will probably call such men ikchantikas. So he's saying, don't judge the message by virtue of who's giving it to you. Some people will look like they know everything and they won't know shit. And some people are going to look like maybe they don't know everything, and they actually do. That's what that just qualified. All right? Don't judge it by how they appear or what other people say about them. It's what the sutras say, and that's how you should judge them. In the Nirvana Sutra, do you understand?
Yes.
I mean, people could look at me and the way I talk, and they could totally dismiss me, right? Easily, and I could understand that. That's not a problem. I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to the people that know Tom. We know each other from a past life. In the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha speaks as follows: after I have passed away, after the former day of the law has ended and the middle day of the law has begun, there will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline, but they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras. That's no different than a lot of priests in different schools that I know. For sure they weren't doing the thing. Okay? But they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras, and instead will crave all kinds of food and drink to nourish their bodies. Though they wear the clothes of a monk, they will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen who, narrowing their eyes, stalk softly. They will be like a cat on the prowl for mice, and they will constantly reiterate these words, I have attained arhatship. Okay? Outwardly, they will seem to be wise and good, but within they will harbor greed and jealousy. And when they are asked to preach the teachings, they will say nothing because they're not capable. Like Brahmins who have taken a vow of silence. They are not true monks. They merely have the appearance of monks. Consumed by their erroneous views, they slander the correct teaching. In light of the sun and the moon, they are, the Lotus Sutra preached on, in light of the sun and the moon, that are the Lotus Sutra preached on, Eagle Peak and the Nirvana Sutra preached at, the Sal Grove, or in the bright mirrors that are the commentaries by Miolo of Peeling and Chi Tu of Tuchun. We can discern without a trace of obscurity the ugly faces of the priests of the various schools of the present-day Japan, especially the Zen precepts and Nimbutsu schools. The Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law says, in the encouraging devotion chapter, after the Buddha has passed into extinction in an age of fear and evil, and in the peaceful practices chapter says, in the evil age thereafter, in the latter age, and in the latter age hereafter, when the law is about to perish, The distinctions in benefits chapter says, in the evil age of the latter day of the law. The medicine king chapter says, in the last 500-year period. The exhortation to preach chapter of the Lotus Sutra of the correct law says, in the latter age hereafter and in the latter age to come. The same type of language is found in the supplemented Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law. Tentai states, in the middle day of the law, the 3 schools of the south and the 7 schools of the north are the enemies of the Lotus Sutra. And Dingyo states, at the middle day of the law, the scholars of the 6 Nara schools are the enemies of the Lotus Sutra. At the end of the middle day of the law, the scholars of the 6 Nara schools are the enemies of the Lotus Sutra. At the very bottom of page 271, second column. In the time of Tentai and Dingyo, the 3 types of enemies mentioned above had not yet appeared. Okay? Because it wasn't time yet. Okay? But we must recall that when Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, and many treasures Buddha sat side by side in the treasure tower like the sun and the moon, and the Buddhas who were emanations of Shakyamuni had come from the 10 directions and were arranged beneath the trees like so many stars, then it was said that after the 1,000 years of the former day of the law and the 1,000 years of the middle day of the law, at the beginning of the latter day of the law, there would be 3 types of enemies of the Lotus Sutra. How could this pronouncement be made by these 800 million Nayutas of Bodhisattva have been an empty or a false prediction? He says the beginning of the latter day of the law is when the 3 powerful enemies even can appear. It is now some 2,200 years since the thus come one passed away. Even if it were possible to point straight to the earth and miss it, if the flowers were to cease blooming in the spring, still I am certain that these 3 powerful enemies exist in the land of Japan. If so, then, who is to be numbered among the 3 powerful enemies? And who is to be accounted as a votary of the Lotus Sutra? It is a troubling question. Are we, I and my disciples, to be numbered among the 3 enemies? Or are we to be numbered among the votaries of the Lotus Sutra? A troubling question. In the 24-year, and now he's going to answer the question. Yes, you know what the answer is. In the 24th year of the reign of King Chao, the 4th ruler of the Chao dynasty, and with the cyclical sign Kino e Tora, on the 8th night of the 8th day of the 4th month, a 5-colored light spread across the sky from north to south until all was as bright as noon. The earth shook in 6 different ways, and no rain fell. And though no rain fell, the rivers and streams, wells and ponds brimmed with water. All the trees and plants bloomed and bore fruit. It was a wondrous happening indeed. King Chao was greatly surprised. The grand historian Su Yu performed divinations and announced, a sage has been born in the western region. What about our country? Asked King Chao, to which Su Yu replied, nothing particular will happen for now, but 1,000 years from now, the words of this sage will be brought to this country and will bring benefit to all living beings. Su Yu was a scholar of non-Buddhist texts who had not in the slightest degree freed himself from illusions of thought and desire, and yet he was able to know what would happen 1,000 years in the future. And just as he predicted, 1,015 years after the Buddha's passing, in the reign of the Emperor Ming, the 2nd ruler of the latter Han dynasty, in the 10th year of the Yunping era, with the cyclical sign Hinoto-u, the doctrines of Buddhism were introduced to China. On quite a different level is the prediction that I have described above that was made by the various bodhisattvas in the presence of Shakyamuni Buddha's many treasures and the Buddhas of the 10 directions that were emanations of Shakyamuni Buddha. In view of this prediction, how could the 3 types of enemies of the Lotus Sutra help but be present in Japan today? In the Buddha Successor Sutra, the Buddha is recorded as saying, after my passing during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law, there will be 24 persons in succession who will spread abroad the correct teachings as I have taught them. Maheke Shayapa and Ananda were contemporaries of the Buddha, and so we will pass them over. But 100 years later, there was a monk, Parshva, 600 years later, Bodhisattva Ashvagosha. 700 years later, Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, along with others, all appearing just as the prophecy said that they would. If so, how could the prophecy in the encouraging devotion chapter of Lotus Sutra be in vain? If this prophecy were at variance with the truth, then the whole Lotus Sutra would be at variance with the truth. Then the predictions that Sherry Future will in the future become the thus come one flower glow, and that Maheke Shayapa will become the thus come one light bright, would all be mere lies. In that case, the teachings put forward in the sutras and that preceded the Lotus Sutra would be absolutely correct, and the voice hearers would be destined never to achieve Buddhahood. If it were true that one should give alms to a dog or a fox before giving them to a voice hearer such as Ananda, then where would we stand? The passage from the encouraging devotion chapter mentions three groups of people, saying, first, there will be many ignorant people. Second, that in that evil age there will be monks, and referring third to the monks wearing clothes of parched rags. The first category of ignorant people are the important lay believers who support monks in the second and third categories. According to the great teacher Myolo, commenting on the people in the first group, says they represent the arrogance and presumption of lay people. The Tu Chun says that they will appeal to the government authorities, slandering the law and its practitioners. Concerning the second group of enemies of the Lotus Sutra, the sutra says, in that evil age there will be monks with perverse wisdom and hearts that are fawning and crooked, who will suppose that they have attained what they have not attained, being proud and boastful in heart. Similarly, the Nirvana Sutra says, in that age there will be evil monks. These evil men will read and recite this sutra, but they will ignore and put aside the profound and vital principles that the thus come one has expounded in it. The great concentration and insight says, if one lacks faith in the Lotus Sutra, one will object that it pertains to the lofty realm of the sages, something far beyond the capacity of one's own wisdom to comprehend. If one lacks wisdom, one will become puffed up with arrogance and will claim to be equal to the Buddha. We see an example of this in the statement by the meditation master Tao Chao. The second reason for the first difficulty in understanding the Lotus Sutra is that its principles are very profound, but human understanding is slight. Honen says religious practices other than the Nimbutsu do not accord with the people's capacities. They are not appropriate for the times. To combat such views, the 10th volume of On Words and Phrases, this would be Myolo, reads, probably those who are mistaken in their understanding fail to realize how great is the benefit gained even by a beginner in the practice of the Lotus Sutra. They assume that that benefit is reserved for those who are far advanced in practice and disparage beginners. Therefore, the sutra here demonstrates its power by revealing that practice is shallow, but the benefit that results is profound indeed. The great teacher Dingyo declares, the former and middle days are almost over, and the latter day is near at hand. Now indeed is the time when the one vehicle of the Lotus Sutra will prove how perfectly it fits the capacities of all people. How do we know this is true? Because the Peaceful Practices chapter of the Lotus Sutra, chapter 13, states, in the latter age hereafter, when the law is about to perish, accept and embrace this sutra. And Eshin says, throughout Japan, all people share the same capacity to attain Buddhahood through the perfect teaching. Now, which opinion should we believe? That of Tao Chou and Honen, or that of Dingyo and Eshin? The former has not a scrap of evidence in the sutras to support it. The latter is based firmly upon the Lotus Sutra. Moreover, the great teacher Dingyo of Mount Hei is for all priests throughout Japan the master of ordination into priesthood. How could any priest turn their hearts toward a person like Honen, who is possessed by the heavenly devil, and reject the great teacher Dingyo, the master of ordination? If Honen was a truly wise man, why did he not, in his Nimbutsu chosen above all, mention the passages of explanation by Dingyo and Eshin such as I have quoted above, and resolve the contradiction? He did not do so because he is the kind of person who hides the teachings of others. When the Lotus Sutra speaks of the second type of enemy, saying that in the evil age there will be monks, he is referring to men like Honen, who disregard the precepts and hold perverse views. The Nirvana Sutra says, World Honored One, today I have learned the correct view for the first time. World Honored One, up until today, we all have been people of mistaken views. Myolo explains this by saying, they themselves referred to the three teachings that they practiced until that time as mistaken views. The Great Concentration and Insight says, the Nirvana Sutra says, up until today, we have all been people of mistaken views. Mistaken is bad, is it not? The annotations on Great Concentration and Insight says, mistaken is bad, therefore let it be known that only the perfect teaching is good. There are two meanings involved here. First, what accords with the truth is to be accounted good, and what goes against the truth is to be accounted bad. This is the meaning from the relative viewpoint. Second, attachment to this viewpoint is bad, and transcending it is good. This is the meaning of the absolute viewpoint. This was a very confusing paragraph. I won't go back and explain it. It's on page 274. From both the relative and absolute viewpoints, we should abandon all that is bad. To be attached to the perfect teaching is bad, and to be attached to the other three teachings, of course, even worse. I'm going to go ahead and go back and then stop. Let me go back to page 274, where it says in the middle, the Nirvana Sutra says, World Honored One, today I have learned the correct view for the first time. World Honored One, up till today, we all have been people of mistaken views. Myolo explains this by saying they themselves referred to the three teachings that they had practiced until that time as mistaken views. And the Great Concentration and Insight says, the Nirvana Sutra says, up until today, we have all been people of mistaken views. Mistaken is bad, is it not? The annotations on Great Concentration and Insight says, mistaken is bad, therefore let it be known that only the perfect teaching is good. There are two meanings involved. First, what accords with the truth is to be accounted good, and what goes against the truth is to be accounted bad. This is the meaning from the relative viewpoint. Second, from the relative viewpoint is like obvious cause and effect. But then he says, attachment to this viewpoint that discerns good and evil, is bad. Attachment, because then you're never able to discern the Ikchantika that's actually being a Buddha. Do you understand? Yes. Okay, that's why I went back. To decide that that's in all cases never change. Okay, all right, is bad. And transcending, it is good. This is the meaning of from the absolute view, absolute myo versus relative myo. Yes. From both the relative and absolute viewpoints, we should abandon all that is bad. To be attached to the perfect teaching is bad, and to be attached to the other three teachings is, of course, even worse. All right, and I'll stop there. We're stopping on page 274 in the second column, the goods and evils of non-Buddhists. Thank you.